Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we're going to get into insecurities in relationships. And this topic stems from an email we got from a listener. And so we're going to kind of talk about some of the tendencies that he has in his relationship that he considers to be problematic. And he wants to fix them, and he was looking for advice.
I would guess his partner thinks they're problematic too.
Probably. Yeah, there were some of them that definitely would be a red flag. You would definitely call some of these behaviors a red flag. And so I think really the overarching issue is insecurities. So he says that he's noticed that he has controlling tendencies in his relationship. And we'll kind of get into that kind of a little bit, some of the behaviors that are problematic. But I think one of the things that immediately stuck out to me is the fact that he recognized these problematic behaviors, because most people in controlling relationships don't think that it's problematic. They think their behavior is fine, or at least they're not interested in changing it. And one of the things that he says in this email is that he wants to, he doesn't want it to ruin the relationship, but he doesn't know how to get past it.
Right. And that's a real positive. Now, and before we start, often, when we get emails from readers, they give some detail, but for instance, if he were sitting in front of me, there would be a lot of questions that I'd want to ask him. So for instance, we don't know the nature of the relationship. Is it long-term, short-term? Mm-hmm. Are they living together? Are they living separate? Are they in a committed relationship? Things like that, which the context is often important. And so when we talk about it, we'll try and make it general enough that it would fit a lot of different situations. But I want to acknowledge at the outset that there is a lot that we don't know about this particular story. We know about his behaviors. And I agree with you, the fact that he is aware of it, which his partner has probably made him aware of it and, done some, she's concerned, I would guess, and complaining about it. And so he wants to change it. So that's a real positive in my mind, because you're right that often they don't want to change it.
And this email stemmed from the episode we did just last month on controlling relationships. And he's like, hey, I noticed that I have some of these tendencies. And in the episode we did on controlling relationships, we really talked about it from the perspective of, this is what a controlling relationship is like. This is why it's problematic. And this is what you can do about it to get out. And so we're going to kind of talk about it from the opposite perspective of, I have these insecurities in my relationship. How do I get past them? And so we're going to kind of keep it general enough of, how can you basically improve yourself so you can be a better partner in a relationship?
No, I agree. That's a good focus. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now some of the tendencies that this listener has are, so he tends to ask a lot of questions about what she's doing, who she's with, and what's happening when he's not around. And we kind of talked about that before, is, it's very much normal to be interested in your partner and what they're doing. That's very healthy, but it sounds like he's taking it to the extreme of, he wants to know because he's concerned about what she's doing. And another one of the things that he said is, he feels like he has to have a lot of pictures of them together on social media, so everyone knows that they're together. And so those two things paired together, because individually, both of those tendencies, like just wanting to know everything your partner is doing, that can be a sign of a healthy relationship. Wanting to broadcast your relationship to everyone can also be a sign of a healthy relationship. But when you put them together in the way that he does, then it becomes problematic.
Right. And I think, it could be the process he's using as well, because if we go back to some of Gottman's, 7 principles, one of them is that he calls it his love maps. And so essentially, asking a lot of questions about what she's doing is a way to improve his love map. I don't think that's what's going on.
No.
I think we should start with a kind of the umbrella idea that, so we're calling it insecurities. which is true. I think another word for it would be anxiety. He's anxious in the relationship. Now he's anxious or worried. I mean, so, I'll remind our listeners, anxiety is that physical manifestation of fear or worry. So you have to think about, okay, what is he afraid of? So if you take those two things that you just mentioned, asking a lot of questions, having pictures, he's probably worried, I would guess maybe she's either flirting with someone else or is she with someone else? Are there other men who are interested in her? And so, which goes to the insecurities. He's indicating that he's not secure enough in the relationship, that he's not threatened by her being around, let's say, other men, or, he wants people to know we are together. So I think it's anxiety and the questions. I think we talk about controlling relationships. I think that probably the most common way people with anxiety handle it is they end up being controlling, because it gives them a sense. It gives them a sense, if I know all the information, like for instance, if I know where you are all the time and who you're with and what you're doing, then somehow that gives him a sense of control. It really doesn't. But I mean, it's just, that's the way he's solving it. So I think that, the way you ask questions, or if you're in this committed relationship, for me and Lindy, I'll say, it's really nice to be able to say, hey, I'm going to do this. Yes. And it's not a matter of having control or you need to know where I am. It's more, I'm being nice to let you know what's going on in my day. And so I think that way it ties into Gottman's love map concept. But, it's just a nice thing to do for each other, is to give that information. It sounds to me like he is like really grabbing for that information.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's desperate to have that information.
Right. And Curtis and I have similar things. If I go do something that he's not involved with, he wants to know everything about it because he's genuinely curious, right? Like he wants to hear about how my day went or how this big event went, because it was something I'm excited for. And that's very much part of a healthy, normal relationship. So I think the biggest red flag that was in this email that really makes all of the other issues really problematic is he said that he snoops on her phone.
It's a problem.
That is a huge problem. And he said that he justifies these things with what he thinks he deserves in their relationship, which I found to be interesting. The fact that he's justifying, or he thinks he deserves, because that speaks to maybe a little bit more than an insecurity, or maybe that's just the way his insecurity is manifesting himself.
Yeah, and I don't quite get it. Does he deserves? It's almost, it feels a little egocentric, and I'm going to say narcissistic. I'm not saying he is narcissistic.
Right.
But to say I deserve this in the relationship. Now, before we leave going back to, he says he wants to have pictures of them together on social media. I'm really curious about that, because often when we're in although I want to acknowledge I'm not on social media. I've never been on social media. But the way I understand it is, if you're in a relationship or a new relationship, that putting pictures out there of what you're doing together is pretty common.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So the question I have, why isn't she putting those pictures on because what he's saying implies that the pictures on her social media aren't there. So the question I would want to know is, what's going on there with her? Is she trying to hide the relationship? See, there's always a part, right? In any couple, You've got two parts.
Yeah.
And so we're approaching this, we can only approach it from his perspective because he's the one who wrote the email. But it's really important to realize she's got a part, and we don't know what that is. Is she hiding the relationship from others? If she is, I'd worry if I were he as well.
Right. So let me read this line in the email. It says, I always have this feeling that I need to be shown on her social media to feel more secure and to make sure that everyone around her knows we're together. And so I guess it depends on how often people are posting, right? Because I'm on social media and I don't post every day personally, right? And so, but some people do. And so I think it depends on how often is he wanting to, like every day he needs that reminder of, we're together, we're in a relationship, right? Because like if for me in my own relationship, I most of my posts are about my kids because right, that's my life. But I do post pictures of me and Curtis, and so I know for me personally, like my profile picture on my social media is a picture of me and Curtis because, he's the most important person in my life. And I guess I like people knowing like, hey, I'm married, I'm in this committed relationship, I'm happy, because to an extent, it closes the door for people trying to, I guess, approach me from the perspective of, oh, maybe I can be in a relationship with her. Right.
Well, I agree with that. And so I understand what he's saying.
Yeah.
Because, but again, if he were in front of us, I'd be asking all these questions for clarification. So, for example, is it that he wants something to be posted every day? Then I'd say, well, that's a little much because, and so that, if that's true, then that speaks more to the insecurities. But if it's a situation that she doesn't post or she posts rarely, or maybe not at all, then I'd want to know what's going on with her.
Right.
So he's reacting to something. He's reacting to something from her. We don't know exactly what that is.
Right.
So we're at a loss there to talk about it.
Yes. And there is one interesting thing that he also said. He says that his girlfriend believes that he places too much importance on how other people see and think about a relationship rather than focusing on the relationship itself. So it seems like maybe appearances are important to him. Appearances matter, which I think that's okay to a certain extent. I mean, we should all care about appearances. Like for example, I would never want to give the appearance that I'm not in a committed relationship, right? So to an extent, appearances do matter, but it sounds like maybe he's just taking it too far.
After hearing what you just read, I think there's something going on with her.
Okay.
To me, that sounds like a justification for not posting.
Okay.
Like you're focusing on the wrong thing because and again, maybe she just sees social media different than other people, but I thought that people love to post their relationships. Maybe the relationship is fairly new. Maybe she's not that secure in it as well. Maybe she's wondering if it's going to go somewhere.
That seems to be my impression too, is that it seems like this is a newer relationship, and newer relationships can definitely have a lot of anxiety in them. Right. And I can understand where the newness of it is provoking these anxieties, especially if he has a history of failed relationships, or maybe he's got a history of being cheated on or someone just leaving him. That'd be a really good reason to feel insecure in a new relationship. That can be pretty anxiety inducing.
Yeah, I agree. And so that speaks to one of the things we might talk about in a little more detail is where do these insecurities come from?
Yes.
And, what you mentioned is this idea of past relationships. And we can talk more about family of origin. I think it could come from there as well, but definitely from past relationships. If he's been cheating on or that type of thing, then he's going to be insecure and he needs to figure that out himself. But I think there is the possibility that something's going on with her. I think I understand the reason he wants it posted. It seems like a pretty normal thing to do nowadays. So that I'm curious about that piece.
Yeah. And
snooping on the phone. That's what we
yes.
I think that is really problematic.
It really is. I mean, it means you don't trust her at all.
No.
And a relationship is nothing without trust.
Right. But snoop implies he's doing it on the sly.
Yes, that too. So, well, it implies that he doesn't trust her. And if she finds out or she knows that he's doing this, how can she trust him? Right. Or it's like you can't trust someone who doesn't trust you.
It's just a bad sign for any relationship, even if let's say it's a longer term relationship, they aren't starting out. I think snooping on another person's phone is certainly a violation of their privacy.
Yeah.
I think that's problematic. I understand the reason he's doing it. He's trying to get, so it's back to control. He's trying to get information. It's just a variation on asking questions about where she is and what she's doing. And so all he's doing is snooping on the phone. He's probably looking at texts and email.
Yeah.
If he's listening, I would say stop doing that. right now.
Immediately. Yeah.
Immediately, just don't do it.
I felt, even in my own marriage, I've felt an insecurity before. So it was, and I've shared this before on the podcast, but I think it's worth talking about again in this context. I had just had our first kid. So my oldest was just a few months old, and Curtis was working at a call center, and he was telling me about this girl that he sat with. She was on his team, and so they sat together, and they just had fun during the day, kind of, I don't know, passing time in between calls, right? But he talked so animatedly about her, and he seemed to be having so much fun. I got a little jealous, and it didn't help. I was still dealing with some postpartum depression. I was also feeling very insecure about my own body because I just had a baby. And then I also met her, which didn't help. And she was this cute little redhead, and I got really insecure. And I couldn't help it. And I knew that it was irrational. I knew that Curtis loved me, that he was committed, but I really couldn't help these feelings that I was having. And I just told him about it. And he handled it very, very well. And, he didn't get mad at me, or he didn't say, well, why would you think that? How could you think that I would ever be interested in someone else? He just reassured me. And I explained to him that I knew it was irrational. I said, I know I'm being irrational, but I can't help it. And so he handled it very, very well, and just comforting me and, reaffirming what I already knew of, I'm committed to you and our daughter. There's no one else I could ever want in my life. And so I think that's another important part of an insecurity as a relationship, is the context of the relationship. Can you talk openly about this, about your insecurities? And that might kind of depend on the length of relationship, because if you've been in a relationship for a couple of months,
you wouldn't want to do. No, I agree with you. Again, it's the context. The context is really important.
Yeah.
Are they together long term, or is this short term? Are they getting to know each other? It's very different. It almost sounds to me like it's a newer relationship, just based on the things that he has said. So it's good that he realizes that he has these insecurities and he's willing to work on them. The snooping on the phone, though, I don't know if that's a relationship killer. It could be for some people.
That's a huge red flag. And so I'm hoping, if he's listening, that he can stop and, maybe address some of these insecurities that he has. So let's switch gears and talk about that, and talk about, how do you overcome these insecurities? And the first step is recognition, right? Recognizing that you got a problem.
And where do they come from? So I think I've certainly dealt with clients who have this, and even in long-term relationships, it's pretty problematic. But I think the most common place that it comes from is family of origin.
Yeah.
That there are any number of things that we can experience growing up in a family that lead us to feel insecure about ourselves. And often it's around parenting. And when I talk about parenting, I want to be clear. I'm not blaming parents. I'm just saying this is the context in which this occurs. Because I really believe, I'll say this again, I really believe that most parents do the very best job they can.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that we always do what's best for our children. And we're trying, and we want to. So I think that, for instance, criticism. If he experienced a lot of criticism in his home growing up, ultimately what that does is it makes you feel really insecure, because the message is you're never good enough. Yeah. So if you grow up and all those neurons in your brain are connecting, because they connect based on the experiences we have. And if the experiences you have is you're never good enough, then you move into adulthood and you go into a relationship, and your brain's still wired that way. I'm not good enough. And so I think often the way that translates in, if I'm not good enough, well, she'll find someone else who's better.
Yep.
And so, I really like this person. I want the relationship to work. So I need to have this control so that I can make sure she's not going to meet someone who she thinks is better than I am, because I'm, inside, I'm not feeling good enough. So it's a case of, I don't think he said this in the email, but I would guess he has low self-esteem. And that is problematic. And we'll talk in a minute about one of the best ways, I think, to deal with low self-esteem. So I think family of origin, and then you mentioned past relationships, which I've also seen. If you've been, and again, we don't know his age, do we? I don't think we know his age. And so we don't know if he's young, middle-aged. And so if he's had, say, a longer term relationship that then he was cheated on or something happened that way, he's going to be insecure in the next relationship. And it's one of those things that almost happens universally. And at least he's in a relationship, because often what I see, if someone's been betrayed like that, often they'll say, I'm not going to get into another relationship. They just step back because it's way too painful. And so he's not experiencing that. He's at least trying.
And it could be that it's been a long enough time that he's comfortable again and ready to trust, and maybe, but I mean, I don't know. I imagine that maybe he would have said so, like, or he would have acknowledged, I've got a history with problematic relationships, but
he didn't mention that.
Right. So
I wonder if it, again, I think the most likely source is family of origin, the way we're brought up, because typically, most of us are in the family of origin around 18, 19, 20 years. And that's a long time for our brains to be developing and for those neurons to be making those connections. So I think that's where most insecurities come from.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that your brain is hardwired that way forever.
No,
it is possible to change.
Yeah, it's plastic. And so again, remember, I think we've talked about this on the podcast, that our brain remains plastic throughout the lifespan. And what that means is you can make new connections. And the way your brain makes new connections is through either behavior or experiences. So you don't make new connections by sitting and thinking about it. You do. So you can't control the mind with the mind. You can't control the brain with the mind. You actually go out and have experiences and change your behaviors. So I have talked about this before. Maybe I'll go into a little bit more detail. I call it my behavioral roadmap.
Okay.
I have a link. And so what this is for the listeners is it's a link to a YouTube thing that really explains what I'm going to explain really well. And so for a lot of people, they like to see it. And but I want to let people know it approaches it, I think, from kind of a business aspect, but the concepts are true for relationships as well. So the idea is that if his self-esteem is low, then a lot of people say, well, what can I do to raise that self-esteem? And on the other hand, we have what we call self-concept. And I think when our self-concept, or how we want to be, how we behave, is not in alignment with our self-concept, then our self-esteem tends to be lower. And self-esteem is really an internal barometer on how we think others see us. So if you put that in the context of what's going on here, it's really his barometer of how his partner sees him is not very good, right? Otherwise, he'd be more secure. And so that's, maybe it's a problem of self-esteem just in relationships. So I'm not, it could be that maybe out in the workplace, he has great self-esteem, but it's a different type of barometer. He's out there, maybe he's well regarded, but for whatever reason, his internal barometer of how his partner sees him is not very high. And so the way you change that is through behavior. And so he could look at it in terms of what kind of partner does he want to be? Like what kind of qualities? Does he want to be caring, attentive? See, because you want to envision who you can be as a partner and then become that.
Right. Yeah.
That's what's missing for him. He's focused probably on just worrying about how his partner sees him and that he doesn't measure up.
Okay.
Well, then take control of that and decide, who does he want to be? So for instance, let's say a quality in a boyfriend, but give me one that you think is important. Could be one that Curtis has, or important that you just think works in a relationship.
I would say our ability to communicate well. And I mean, because one of the things I've always appreciated Curtis is the fact that I can tell him anything, and I can tell him insecurities or, worries that I'm having, and he handles it well. Right.
So communication. So let's say that's the general idea. And in communication, there are several things. There has to be honesty. There has to be transparency. There has to be awareness, self-awareness. And also, I think we've talked about this many times, it's being able to listen well.
Yes.
Being able to listen and have that validation and empathy. So if he goes in and says, okay, I want to be the partner who's going to communicate well, and I'm going to focus on really listening well. Now that's just a behavior. And he can probably find aids. He can find books. He can find YouTube videos that help him learn how the skills of listening, because I really believe it's just a skill.
Yeah.
And so if you understand, okay, what does a good listener do? And you break that desire to be a good listener down into specific behaviors and you write them down, then what happens is you look at those and you think, okay, today I'm going to work on this particular behavior. And over time, what happens is you create that self-concept or that behavioral roadmap. And the closer you get to living that, in this case, to being a good listener, then the higher your self-esteem goes. Because you've defined who you want to be in this relationship and you're that person. So I think that's one way to change low self-esteem. I think I've mentioned this. There is a book on self-esteem and it's called I think it's the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem.
Okay.
And I've mentioned that before, and I think it's a pretty good book. There is, however, at the end of the book, I think it's like a 35-week program.
Okay.
And it goes into a lot of detail. I've had in my career, I think I've had one client who actually went through with it, because 35 weeks is a lot. Well, if you think about it, it's over half a year.
Yeah.
Right? Over 6 months. So you have to be committed. It's a daily practice.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But if you look at what's going on with this, and it's hard to describe, so I'm just going to refer people to the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, to the process that this guy outlines. It makes sense to me, because what you're doing is slowly over time, you're changing the way you think about yourself. Now that goes a bit contrary to what I said earlier about just thinking about it and changing it. But I think the change in behavior is you actually are verbalizing this and you're writing it down. So there's actually a lot going on over the 35 weeks that subtly shifts the way you think about yourself. So I think those 2 ways are good ways to help you feel more secure. Now, I've often worked with relationships because I don't know the nature of this relationship, but I think in a committed relationship, I think one of our primary goals is to create emotional security and safety for each other. And so you need to have a conversation about it, because that's going to feel different for each other. And we don't know, his partner may feel insecure in some ways as well. And so depending on how long they've been on the relationship. So, you mentioned this earlier, if this is, a few months old, I don't know that I would go into this.
Right. Just give it time.
It's bad timing. If they've been in the relationship, say over a year or a couple of years, then I think you could have that conversation to say, you'd be able to say, I feel insecure when this happened, and then to be able to talk about it. And hopefully the partner would be able to then respond, after a good conversation, to say, what could I do differently that could help you feel more secure? And I think we do that for each other.
Yes.
Because how we feel secure. You gave a great example of that.
Yep.
That you felt insecure because of this person. Curtis took it, and I don't know that you said what he did, but something changed where he felt secure. Often it's just the act of saying, hey, I know this is irrational, but I'm feeling insecure. Sometimes just getting it out there helps, and it helps the other person be more aware. So I think, eventually to have the conversation with the partner, this is what's going on.
And it really did help just to get it out there. Well, and him reaffirming to me, you're the one I'm in love with, you're the one I'm committed to, was really helpful. And I think the other important thing is, for me, when I told him this, I didn't tell him this because I wanted him to stop this friendship at work. That's not what it was about. I made it about me and how it was my problem. I owned the problem. And I think that's an important step, is you've got to own the problem. You've got to take responsibility for it. Take responsibility for your own emotions.
Right. And I think an extension of that, I agree with that, is that he needs to be responsible for solving this.
Yes.
Now, he can talk to her about it. That doesn't mean it's her job to solve it for him. It's not her job to solve it. It is his job to solve it. And so he has to become more secure with himself and do it internally, rather than rely on this external source, her, the partner, to do that for him. Because that's not going to last.
No.
that won't work long term. And so hopefully one of the big takeaways is this is his, which I think in his email, he acknowledges probably his responsibility. I mean, I'm getting that sense that he wants to do something about it.
Yeah, he acknowledges that it's a problem, which is the first step, right? I mean, it's often the hardest step. And so he's on the right track with this, with wanting to get past this. And, if this relationship doesn't work out, hopefully he can carry these things into his next relationship, or he can recognize that, or he can maybe be preemptive about these insecurities and maybe trying to tap down some of those negative behaviors, right? That can be potentially problematic. And, but I think the first thing that needs to happen is stopping with the snooping.
Right. And so I also think, being a therapist myself, I can't not say, I think you should consider some therapy.
Yep.
Because often you need help to figure out, one, where do the securities come from? Because I think that's important. And then have often a therapist to connect as kind of a guide to help you plot out what are the behavior changes that you can make. And then also therapists, they act as you go in and you check in every week, so there's some accountability and I think accountability, if you're talking about, making any type of changes, is important. So if he has access, we don't know if he does, because therapy is important, is expensive. And I think often insurance doesn't cover a lot of it. But if he does have insurance, I would then look for an in-network provider. And make sure you interview several therapists because I think you can get over the phone. I think you can get a sense of what the person is like over the phone. You have to feel comfortable. And then I think you have to be able to say, here's what I want to work on.
Yeah.
And that way the therapist can say, yeah, I can help you, or no, here's somebody better who could help you. So, but I think therapy would be important. And I don't think it's long-term therapy. I think it's just therapy to help him get back on track and to help him have some insight, because insight isn't everything, but it is something, and it's important.
And for me personally, insight has been very helpful. And often, I know at least for me, when I can recognize the root of a problem, it's instrumental to me in overcoming it. Okay, this is why I'm having this reaction, because I've dealt with anxiety and depression before, and understanding the root of it, that to me, it's comforting, I guess, in a sense. And it kind of gives me a little bit of that sense of control. Okay, I know why I'm feeling this way. And as human beings, we like that. We like knowledge. We like information, and knowledge and knowing, it gives us a sense of control. And that can be a positive thing in the right context.
Right, I agree. And we, as a species, we like to make sense of our world.
Yes.
And so often, we don't know what he's feeling, but he might think, oh, there's something wrong with me. He's internalizing it. And what you can get with some insight in therapy is to be able to say, oh, this is what happened. This is what led me to be insecure. And just that process helps you externalize it, to be able to say, oh, there's a reason that I'm behaving this way. And once you know that there's a reason you're behaving this way, then you're able to change it. I think it makes it really easier to change the behavior, because all of a sudden you get it. It makes sense. Yeah. And so I think people can do that on their own if they really are able to get, have that self-insight. But a lot of people can't. And that's really the job of a therapist, one of the main jobs of a therapist. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, therapy, it's been extremely helpful for me in the past. I mean, I'm also a big advocate of therapy, even if you don't feel like you have, everybody's got something, right? I mean, I think everybody should do talk therapy at least once in their life.
As Harvard Hendricks likes to say, nobody gets out of childhood unscathed.
Yep. I mean, parents, they genuinely do the best they can. I think most of them do, but man, there's no handbook for it.
No, there's not. You don't have to have a license before you get kids.
No. And I mean, it's a big job and it's an important job. But I mean, as a parent, you just have to accept the fact that you're going to do something somehow.
That's right.
to do so. I don't know. I mean, I have emotional damage, not severe emotional damage, but we all have emotional damage from our childhood. And my parents are wonderful people, and I think they did a phenomenal job. But I have emotional damage from it. I know I'm emotionally damaging my kids, but I'm doing the best I can. So you know what? Go to therapy.
So hopefully it's been helpful for him if he's listening, and then also for others that, yes, sometimes we have insecurities. We bring them into the relationship. They don't typically work well, when we express those insecurities, but I think there's a way out of it.
Yep. And hopefully you as a partner can handle insecurities well, right? So like if your partner comes to you and tells you about those insecurities, do your best to try and be empathetic about it.
Understanding and validation and empathy, right?
Yep. All right. So next week, we are going to get into another listener email. And we love these listener emails, by the way. Keep them coming, guys. We love to do topics like this from questions for our listeners. And so topic is going to be narcissistic parents. This kind of goes, I guess, pretty well along with what we just finished talking about is, parents, despite their best efforts, are going to do damage to their kids. And this person is looking for some tips on how to recover from having a narcissistic parent. And so how you can kind of get past that. So it'll be a good one, and we will see you all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.